Good morning, everybody, and happy Monday. Welcome back to your lunch break on this beautiful Monday. I know we're about to start getting some of that fall weather, and it felt like fall this weekend, almost this afternoon, this weekend when we had the return of SEC football. I know so many of us spent our weekend just really glued to that TV and made sure that we kind of soaked in all the football that we have missed during the pandemic. So maybe a little bit later of a start than usual in the month, but that's okay. We still got it. So I feel like we've had so many questions and so many people wondering out loud, what is it like to go to one of these games during a pandemic? What is it like to cover one of them as a sports reporter? So we've got you covered today. We've got our own AL.com sports reporter, Michael Casagrande, here. He's been covering Alabama football for a decade, and this was his first football game during a pandemic, his first Alabama game during COVID. He traveled to Missouri and is here to give us a little bit of the down low on what the differences were and maybe what was the same, if anything was the same. So, Michael, thank you so much. I know it was a really long weekend. I appreciate you taking a little bit of your kind of re-entry time to talk about it with us.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. It was a great time. It was an interesting time. So, yeah.
Well, let's talk about this in a few different sections. Let's talk about first before the game. Now, you get to Missouri, you're headed to the game. Now, when you are in Tuscaloosa, or even when you are going to an away game in a typical year, you have to get from point A, I guess your hotel, to point B, meaning the stadium. And that is some terrible traffic. Anybody who has ever driven in Tuscaloosa on game day knows that experience, and it is pretty miserable. So What was your experience like leaving your hotel and getting to the stadium in Missouri?
It was a joy. It was maybe silver lining. It was the easiest drive I've ever had to a football stadium. It was a little long. It came from St. Louis, so it was longer. But once you got into Columbia, the only impediment were a few red lights. I mean, there were 2 or 3 cars. It was just like a normal Saturday. Granted, I was there a little bit earlier than most people would be there for a game, but still, if you would have told me there was a football game, you couldn't have told me there was a football game if you were driving through that town that day. It was beautiful, and it was a shame because it was a beautiful fall day. It was a little bit warmer, but it was a beautiful day. It was the kind of day that people would have loved to tailgate. It would have been, one of those days that people write home about, that this is what college football is. And it was, it was and it wasn't. It was all this kind of weird, conflict of normal in 2020.
Well, and we know tailgating was not allowed at Missouri in this game. We know that that's something that so many of us are missing. Did you see anybody trying to break that rule, Michael, and trying to set up a tent or trying to hang out outside of the stadium?
It's funny. It was driving in on the interstate. I saw there were some cars in a hotel parking lot that was maybe 10 minutes away from the stadium, and they had a whole tailgate set up in a courtyard hotel Marriott. Doing the tailgate thing, but I didn't see anybody around the stadium. I didn't do that much investigating outside, but there were just a lot of empty parking lots of just pure blacktop, nothing around, nobody even barely a tumbleweed rolling through. It was surreal seeing that. It was 3 hours before game time. It would have been peak 3:00 game day. There would have been everybody there. So yeah, it was just nobody.
And how weird was that for you, who have been covering these Alabama games for so long, and you are so used to that experience of tailgating and fighting through the crowd to get there? So many of us, I have tailgated, I have to admit, I've tailgated more in Auburn than I have in Tuscaloosa, but it's the same experience. You have to kind of fight through a sea of people to get from one end of the green space to the other. And so you having that experience and you having those years under your belt, when you get there, I can't imagine how uncomfortable that must have felt.
Yeah, and it's kind of fun because it's almost like the warm up to the game. Like it kind of puts you in that right mental space to walk through the crowd. And I always like to do that wherever I go. This was exciting for me because it was my 14th. I finally completed the SEC circuit. Going to Missouri was the final SEC football stadium I'd been to. So I was kind of, wanted to feel some of that, but, understanding the situation. But yeah, you don't get that same kind of adrenaline rush. Like this is college football Saturday. It's, you think about how fortunate I think about how fortunate I am to have this job and to be able to do what I do and to be able to travel around and see all these cool places. So, but it was just kind of, I had to ask somebody which side the press box was on because I didn't even know where I was going when I got to the stadium when I got there. So it was interesting. quiet, just kind of a quiet walkover. There was one guy, there's supposedly a locally famous guy kicking a hacky sack around outside the stadium. Was later told he was a Guinness World Book record holder for something with a hacky sack, but he was pretty much the only person I saw from the walk-in to the stadium.
Well, and on a normal day, you wouldn't have even noticed him because there would have been so many people there and he would have been lost in that seat. But I'm glad you mentioned the press box because once you got into the stadium, number one, like you said, you had to find the press box. Once you got into that press box, how is that feeling inside that room different than in a normal non-2020 football game press box?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because there were probably room for 20 or 25 people in that front row, and there were like 10 of us. We're all spaced out. We had a nice little bottle of hand sanitizer for each person. Kept that as a souvenir. Used it, but yeah, it was. Once you get in there, it was kind of normal. It was fun for us because we hang out with these guys. The writers kind of hang out quite a bit, get to know each other pretty well, and I hadn't seen any of them since March, so it's kind of a hey guys, a little reunion up there. But the press box was as close as normal as it gets because we were, once the game starts, it was just football and we're doing our job as best we can, trying to, cover the game, figure it out. But, that was most normal outside of wearing a mask the whole time. And I also want to point out, I want to give my kudos to people who have to wear their mask all the time for their job. I guess I never really realized, having to wear a mask for longer, extended period of times. You have my respect to everybody out there who wears the masks all day, people working in retail, the people, you don't even think about that much, but that's, it was difficult and it was, uncomfortable by the end of it, but it was, it's the way it goes. Can't complain.
Yeah, that's 2020, and you're right. I mean, all of our healthcare workers, our grocery store workers, everybody who are out there all day in those long shifts wearing them, when so many of us complain after wearing it for an hour to go to Target or to go to Walmart. So you're right. I'm glad you said that. But you're in the press box. You're covering this game. There are, I believe you said 11,000 fans allowed into the stadium. What was that like?
Yeah, I walked around into the seats before the game to just kind of get a feel for what it was like with the ushers. I mean, it was interesting. So many of the ushers had the face mask and the shield, and they had a sign. They were holding a sign that was neon green about, always wearing a mask, always having the mask on. And that's interesting. I'm always fascinated, and it's something I talked to Greg Byrne about for a story coming up. It was just how is that going to be enforced? So, what's going to happen if someone refuses? Are they going to be thrown out? It's it's one of those questions. It's hard to get a full answer because it's still, people are still trying to figure out how to handle it. So it was interesting seeing there were a lot of Alabama fans, a lot of family members there, more than I was thinking there would be with the limited number of tickets. And wasn't sure if Missouri fans would not want to give up their tickets, but it was weird because it was a small crowd, but they were all spaced out. If you look at it and you look at some of the pictures I took, if you weren't very looking that hard, you wouldn't even notice the people were there because they were so evenly distributed. It wasn't 11,000 clumped in like in a high school game at Bryant Denny or Jordan Hare. So it felt kind of empty. We were in a press box that was closed off. The windows were closed, so you don't get that feel of the outside. You don't get as much of that natural sound coming in, but it felt kind of quiet. As the difference between 11,000 and 60,000 fans would have normally been.
We've got so many people in the comments just saying like they loved it. I guess even if you can't go, there are so many people that have said, look, I don't even need to be in the stadium. Just give it to me. Let me watch it on TV and I will be happy. It looks like a lot of our commoners feel that way as well. But we go through the game and then there is there are people who maybe aren't as familiar with football or the reporting side that don't realize there's always a post-game press conference. Even though you were in Missouri, you were at the game, you were there, those post-game press conferences were still done even for the people who were attending via an online platform.
Yeah, it was. I was laughing the whole time because we were trying to figure out how we were going to do it because everybody was sitting, we were probably 10 feet apart in the press box, but we all had to hear the Zoom call and we all had to record it because we had a quick turnaround to get stories written. And so it was this funny echo throughout the press box of like 10 different computers playing the same audio and feedback. And we were trying to figure out how to ask the questions quietly and take our masks off to ask the questions. And I was laughing. It was just kind of funny. It was like at a certain point, it was just like it was funny. It was.
You have to laugh or you will cry. We've learned that in 2020. But one thing that I thought was so funny is so many of us who are doing meetings via these platforms. I know you and I, we have a meeting with our company every day, and it never fails. There's always at least one person who cannot figure out how to unmute themselves. It never fails. It's just the way of the world. And that happened in one of these interviews, didn't it?
Yeah, Dylan Moses, for whatever, like it was Nick Saban, Mac Jones, and then Dylan Moses. Normally get like 5-6 players after the game. In normal game, we got 2 after this one, and Dylan Moses was stuck on mute for 90 seconds of the 3.5 minutes that we were talking. And the audio, I think we might even have the full audio of the confusion in the background of the writers. Can you hear him? I can't hear him. Can you hear him? Everyone's trying to figure out why. He was talking. We could see his lips moving. He was answering the question. So it went on for 90 seconds or so. But it just sort of, that whole day was 2020 all wrapped up in one little bow. We got sports. It was kind of sports. It was not all the way. I wrote about it. It was kind of like our compromise. It was kind of the compromise. Like, you want football, this is what it's going to be. It's not going to be exactly like you remember it, but you want this or nothing. So I think a lot of people would take that, and it was, at the end of the day, it all seemed to work. It was normal for 60 minutes of football. I said it was interesting. It was nice getting social media, Twitter anger about football as opposed to everything else. It felt normal for people to be mad at me for something about the game. So.
Right. Obviously.
Yeah.
But it's, honestly, it makes me feel better that Dylan Moses had that issue, because then when I do it, I don't feel quite as ditzy when I have that moment. So it happens to all of us. And that's the working from home life, I guess. But
and it wasn't Dylan's fault. I don't want to throw Dylan under the bus. This was not Dylan's fault. It was the computer that was placed in front of him. So he was.
Well, and to be fair as well, I'm sure he knows better than us because they're college kids and they're probably much more tech savvy than we are these days. So the gentleman or the woman who handled the computer, I get it. We all
remain nameless. I'm not.
Who will remain nameless from then. But Michael, what everybody wants to know too is, what did Nick Saban think about this whole day?
Yeah, and that's what I asked him. I got the first question. I was hoping it didn't echo too bad. I hope he could hear me, because that's sometimes an issue. You can't always hear the questions. But I just said, did it feel normal? And I think I don't have the quote in front of me, but I think he said it didn't feel normal. It didn't feel like, it didn't have the same feel with the crowd. But he also quickly transitioned to say that it didn't, in fact, the way they played, that, they would say that they don't notice the crowd, whether they're there or not, that they don't want to depend on the outside influences of whether a crowd is loud or not to get them fired up, whether they're on the road or at home. So, I'm sure that's a talking point. That's something they work on, to not think about that. So it didn't feel normal. It wasn't as loud. There were a few, false starts that were you could sometimes chalk up to being crowd noise on the road, but it didn't seem to impact the way they were playing. They weren't intimidated by any noise where they couldn't communicate.
Well, and we got a lot of roll tides in the comment thread here, but we do have a question I'm interested to know if you have any insight on, Michael. And this is from Chuck, and he says that he wonders if tuition will have to go up because these stadiums will not be being filled. That way, ticket sales are not going to be happening. Not the school and the city will not be getting that revenue. So that's, I think, Chuck wondering out loud about, will tuition be affected?
I mean, I don't think so, because at least University of Alabama, they're in a normal year, they're almost 100% self-sustaining at athletics. They don't take school money, academic money, tuition money, fee money does not go directly towards to fund the athletic department. So how they cover, I talked to Greg Byrne, a couple of days ago, and they still are expecting a $75 million shortfall in revenue compared to a normal year. They've instituted cost cutting. They've trimmed budgets. They've trimmed non-essential things. So how they make up for that shortfall, all the way, I can't say for certain. But directly from tuition, I don't think that would be the exact route they would take.
That's interesting, though. I didn't know that there are no tuition money that typically goes into the athletics department, that they are self-sustaining.
In a lot of schools, there are student fees at most schools to sustain. A lot of the smaller schools who don't have the revenue. Alabama has more revenue streams. You know, the TV contracts are the biggest ones, but the tickets. I think football tickets a year ago, $36 million was the revenue for football tickets. So that's a chunk of it. I think their total revenues are usually in the $180 million range. For some perspective on that, you know, there still will be ticket revenue because there still will be fans at games, but 20%, you know, that's a significant chunk taken out.
Absolutely. Well, and that's so you said we're expecting a $75 million shortfall this year. So, Chuck, hopefully those that will not rise. That tuition will not rise, and we will just have to wait and see. I think where a lot of this money comes from, and a lot of other things happen as 2020 and the COVID pandemic just keeps going throughout the year. So, Michael, thank you so much for coming in, giving us a firsthand look at this whole SEC football weekend that I know so many of us enjoyed. Can you give us the details about this next weekend, about the games coming up?
Sure. Yeah, Alabama plays Texas A&M at 2:30 Central Saturday at Bryant-Denny. Renovated Bryant-Denny, $107 million renovation is complete. I think just a little under 20,000 will be allowed in for this game and for the rest of the season. The tickets have already been sold, distributed, allocated for the games. So it'll be interesting. I plan on being out there and just getting a feel for the atmosphere for what it's going to be like. I'm not going to be in the press box because that's interesting. We don't have the same space in the past. For every home or road game, there are three of us who cover the team. At least would be there. Three of us for every home and road game, and more. People writing columns and video crew. And we had one seat at the press box in Missouri, and I think we have one moving forward. So it's a lot of people working from other places than inside the stadium too. I don't know if anyone's interested in that.
And then Auburn is also playing, I believe, at Georgia this weekend as well. So if you're an Auburn fan, you've got a good game coming up this weekend as well. And that is the later game during the day.
Yep.
So thank everybody for watching. I'm looking at these comments. We've got, I will give JBS, I believe that is how you say it, a quick shout out. He, I believe, plays at Russell County High School. And he is saying that they have some good talent over there, 6A football. So JBS, good luck this season. And we know you're going to do great things. So everybody, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Michael, for breaking this all down. And we will see all of you tomorrow.